Hey everyone, welcome to the 6th edition of Establishment Exiles. My name is Mike Figueredo. I am reporting live from Kyle Kulinski's old massage parlor studio. And with me today on the show, I have Alicé anew. Can you hear me, Alicé?
Is my internet going off?
Uh-oh.
We hear you fine.
Yeah, we hear you now.
Okay, because it just paused.
Okay, it was probably my internet. I think that Comcast is throttling me because of my shit talking. We also have Ashley Hudson here today.
Hey.
And then of course we have our special guest, host of Secular Talk and co-founder of Justice Democrats, Kyle Kulinski.
Hello everybody. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show. And also on such short notice too. We appreciate it, man.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, in the spirit of the holidays, I thought it would be great for us to talk about snowflakes. Now, I don't want to focus on left-wing SJWs because I think we all agree that they are problematic on our side, but we all speak out against them. The ones who, in particular, get a pass are the right-wing SJWs, who I think are even more easily triggered than left-wing SJWs. I'm talking about Cernovich. I'm talking about evangelicals. Yeah. And, it's a special topic today, which is perfect for our guests because nobody shits on right than Kyle Kulinski. So Kyle, you lately have been kind of going after Cernovich. So do you have anything to say in particular about right-wing SJWs? Because I think you really hit it best.
Yeah, I think what's most frustrating about that crowd is the fact that they kind of make a point of pretending that they're really, really principled and they care so much about free speech and that, hey, everybody should get over it if you're offended. Like, nobody cares about you being offended. Like, we care about facts over feelings. But then, like, at the first chance they feel like they get the opportunity, they immediately flip on that. And I've never seen a better example of it than what happened recently with Sam Seder. How, Mike Cernovich dug up an old tweet from Sam Seder in 2009 where Sam was basically poking fun at people who were excusing Roman Polanski's, the allegations against Roman Polanski of like raping a 13-year-old. So, he said something along the lines of, if my daughter ever gets raped, I hope it's by like a very talented man or something like that. And they dug this up, took it out of context, pretended like he's literally pro-rape. Like, okay, really? Like, what person on planet Earth has ever wished their daughter was raped? Like, it's so obviously an attempt to be sarcastic, but they took it out of context, pretended it wasn't sarcastic, and then they go on this, this crusade of trying to get him fired, and they briefly succeeded. And what's stunning was, like, a few of these people tweeted at me because I, said how they're fucking hypocrites, and I can't believe how fast they flip on this supposed belief in free speech. And so many of them hit me with like, well, maybe it's time for the left to get a taste of its own medicine. And it's like, well, then you are just admitting that you want to be an equal and opposite hypocrite. So if there's somebody, on the left who says, I don't want to give a platform to this hateful person and we should protest them giving a speech at a college campus. What you're saying is I would do the same thing if, let's say Antifa was going to go, somebody who's an Antifa leader was going to go give a speech at a college campus. I would be the one standing out there with the sign saying, don't allow them to come here. And it's like, well, then just be honest and admit that you don't believe in free speech. You just use it as a tactic to, really use it as cover for the most heinous people in the country. What you'll notice is that whenever somebody's like genuinely bigoted, they'll never come out and say, no, I'm going to defend this person's bigotry. They'll say, oh man, why don't you just let them talk? It's about free speech. You're supposed to let them talk. So they use it as a cover for like disgusting ideas. And so that's what it's really about. That's why you see, like, for example, Tommy Lahren has been just the biggest one, like, oh, you're such a snowflake, get over it. Nobody cares if your feelings are hurt. And then meanwhile, she's the one who's like cheerleading people like Colin Kaepernick getting fired for peaceful protest. It's like, well, there's a perfect example where you could stand up and say, hey, listen, I'm the person who said I'm principled on free speech. This guy's doing a non-violent protest against police brutality. So he should be protected. He should still have a job in the NFL. Even though I disagree with him on the issue, he should, everybody should let him keep his job. But no, they flip immediately based on their own political leanings. So I guess the thing that annoys me the most is that there's plenty of people who shit on the left whenever there are authoritarians in the left wing and, they deplatform people on college campuses and stuff. There's like a universal uproar when that happens. But people on the right just get away with their snowflakeism in the most brazen ways. Like Donald Trump is another perfect example. And I'll just give this last example, then I'll shut up and let you guys talk. But so for Donald Trump, I mean, he sued Bill Maher because Bill Maher made a joke about how Donald Trump's dad might be an orangutan. Like, he sued him. He literally served him with court papers. If you now take Donald Trump out of the picture and imagine that's a left-wing college kid with pink hair, how that would be the biggest story. Dave Rubin would have fucking 7 episodes about how this pink-haired college kid is the biggest threat in America to free speech. But when it's the president of the United States who does it, not only do they not talk about it, they act like he's a hero for free speech and he's busting up political correctness when he is the quintessential example of a right-wing snowflake and social injustice warrior.
I think my favorite of Donald Trump's lawsuits was when he sued the journalist that said he was a millionaire. And that was incorrect because actually he's a billionaire.
Yes.
And that hurts his public image. Yes.
I didn't know about that one either.
Somebody for saying he's a millionaire. Yeah.
That's a great example. I didn't know about that. I knew he did a bunch of suits over speech stuff, but I didn't know about that one. That's a good one. I got to add that to my repertoire.
Yeah, definitely add that one because that is quintessential Donald Trump. And the way that he argues it is through this economic lens, right? Like my net worth and my image and my brand is Trump and I'm so rich and people want to be associated with it because it's so spectacularly decadent. And that's because I'm a billionaire, not a millionaire.
Right.
So I actually hadn't thought about the snowflake aspect of somebody like, I was going to say of somebody like Trump, but he's the quintessential snowflake.
Yeah. He was triggered by being called a millionaire. So he needed his safe space. He sued to get his safe space back, the billionaire safe space.
And speaking of being triggered, I've been talking about net neutrality. I've been tweeting a lot of naughty words to, politicians and FCC commissioners and whatnot. And then I had a right-wing snowflake tell me that the minute I started to use profanity, my point was lost. So everything that I said disregarded. So I responded saying, I'm sorry I triggered you, snowflake, but the next time our public officials screw us over, I'll be sure to keep your feelings in mind. And it irritates me because these are the same fucking people. Like, I went through this. This is an individual. I won't name drop him because he's just a nobody. But he has videos on YouTube. He has his own little show that talks about snowflakes and whatnot. So they will rail against people who are seemingly against free speech on the left, but they never say anything on the right. And I don't want to name drop too many people here because I don't want to piss off too many people. But hypothetically speaking, one show that I used to watch, I'll call it the Rubin Report. So I went through this individual's Twitter feed, 0 posts about net neutrality. If you really care about freedom of speech, why aren't you shouting from the fucking mountaintops right now about what's going to happen? I mean, right-wingers like Baked Alaska, I just name dropped, goddammit. No, but like Baked Alaska, they were banned from Twitter. Milo Yiannopoulos, banned from Twitter. These are people who are against net neutrality. I don't know about Baked Alaska, but Milo Yiannopoulos is against net neutrality. But he's willing to allow, seemingly left-leaning companies like Comcast, who sponsored the Democratic National Committee or Convention in 2016, to take control of the internet. Does he not think that Breitbart would be censored and not included in a Comcast news package if they say one thing that's controversial? I mean, I don't understand it. If you really care about free speech, this is the issue of our lifetimes, perhaps, that will have the biggest impact on free speech. Yeah. So the hypocrisy is what drives me absolutely insane. So whenever you talk about right-wing social injustice warriors, it's therapeutic for me because nobody articulates just how big of hypocrites these people really are than you. So,
well, it's great. It's hard to tell on the net neutrality issue which ones on the right are lying and which ones have genuinely been duped by the propaganda. So like you look at somebody like Ajit Pai, it's not hard to tell. Ajit Pai's a liar. Ajit Pai knows exactly the ramifications of his actions. He knows he's doing the bidding of the internet service providers. He knows this is going to ruin net neutrality and freedom on the internet. He knows that now you're going to have the internet turn into a lot more like a cable type thing where you got to pay for different packages. But like somebody like Ben Shapiro or, you know, somebody like Rubin for like, there's a chance that they might just be that stupid where they fell for the propaganda on the right where they try to pretend. And if you notice, this is how you know they're so incredibly wrong and it's so disingenuous, is that the only argument they have is to just totally lie and pretend like, no, we're the ones who are for net neutrality. If you look at the way this was framed by some of those cretins on the FCC, that's what they said. Like Ajit Pai is like, no, I'm the one who's actually for net neutrality. So what's so amazing is that they have no argument so much to the point that they just have to pretend to be the people who are opposing them. And that's really, really, really sad.
It is, yeah. And it just gets back to this whole idea that if you truly care about freedom of speech, then this is an issue that you should be, you know, speaking out about. But the problem is that they don't really care about freedom of speech. To talk about freedom of speech, you know, in the left-wing SJW sense, the only reason why they purport to care about it is because that gets you clicks. So Milo Yiannopoulos, you know, getting shut down from Berkeley or whatever, that gets you a lot of clicks. So I think that a lot of it, one part of it is clickbaity and basically just trying to ride this wave of anti-SJWism, which again, none of us will deny that left-wing authoritarians are a problem. But the problem is that these people who are supposed to be in favor of free speech, they never acknowledge the hypocrisy on their own side. Yeah. And some of the biggest ones who are, I think, right-wing SJWs are the evangelicals. I mean, the people like Jim Baker, Pat Robertson. These are people who are triggered at the dumbest things ever. Just the existence of homosexuality, for example, triggers Roy Moore. How can they not see that and speak out against that? It drives me nuts.
Christians have a right to the First Amendment, Mike.
That's
only
true.
Christians are the ones that can run for office because you have to swear on the Bible. America was founded as a Christian nation, and the Constitution is a Christian document. So when you have all these people coming and suddenly starting to swear to uphold the Constitution and they're Muslim, that can't be right.
Roy, you're alluding to Roy Moore's.
That is literally the argument.
Yeah, Roy Moore's spokesperson.
Exactly. Thank you. I take pride in that. You know, it can be a hard job. But like the arguments that he uses is based on this Christian theocracy that only this specific group of people are allowed these protections under the law, and then everybody else. And these are people that also say that diversity isn't good, that America should be shutting its borders, and America is a Judeo-Christian nation and needs to uphold its values. So then those rights only apply to a very specific set of people.
What's funny, you're right, and what's funny is that they're kind of admitting the worst version of themselves. Like they're kind of admitting the strongest left-wing critics version of themselves when they say like, oh, you have to swear in a Bible, so obviously only Christians can run for office. Like when they say that, they're kind of admitting that like, oh yeah, we also don't think that minorities really have rights either. Because at the founding of the nation, there was the 3/5 compromise. Yeah. So like they weren't viewed as people. So when they say something like that, like, oh, what do you mean you have to swear on a Bible? So obviously only Christians can run. Like inherent in that is this idea of like, well, obviously only land-owning white males really have rights. And that's like a total verification of their strongest critics who would argue, hey, these people are bigoted. These people are against anybody who's not like themselves. Then they go on and prove it when they say stuff like that.
So there was something that happened, I could be like misremembering it, but there was something that happened here at the state level. Honestly, I don't even remember when. I just remember reading about it like a few months ago. But they recently, like at the state level, passed a law. Like I said, I could be slightly misremembering, but the basic premise is, I think, so like daycares, ones that are Christian daycares, you know, because there's a lot of Christian schools, Christian.
And Ashley, just to clarify, you're in Alabama, right? So that's what you're referring to. Okay.
Yes, Alabama. Now, like I said, I could be slightly misremembering this, but if I believe they made it so that these like daycares or whatever they're called, they could refuse people on the basis of religion, which is crazy because they're always like religious freedom, religious rights. But I'm pretty sure, because I think I talked to somebody about this, my guess is they just want to keep like, you know, Muslims out and maybe just not God-fearing people, which is crazy. Like it's crazy to me that they can do that, but that's what they did. And I don't know if you guys remember either. It was a while back. A couple of women went and they protested something that Jeff Sessions was doing. I think it was not long after he got appointed, but they were protesting something that he did. I can't remember. And I think actually they just said a couple of things like that they didn't agree with him. I don't know if you guys can remember this, but they were actually removed from there. And I think not only were they removed, but I'm pretty sure that they were going to be charged just for saying they disagree with what Jeff Sessions was doing. And if I remember correctly, it was pretty like minimal and pretty unoffensive relative to a lot of other things that are going on. So that's a good example of one of your like snowflake, that Jeff Sessions, and I don't remember what, but yeah.
Yeah, they define their rights as their right to take away everybody else's rights. That's that's not a stretch
great way
either.
To put it.
That's not a stretch either, because when you look at even historically, take a look at the arguments that were made back during segregation, when, you know, the northern states and the federal government were trying to basically get them to stop doing that. They would say, oh no, here we go with the northern aggression again. And this is all about state. Even back to slavery, they used to say, no, this isn't about slavery. This is about states' rights. So they always try to pivot and change the argument to states' rights, because in their mind, they mean the state's rights to determine that people are inferior to them, and then they get to take away the rights of other people. So that's part and parcel of their ideology and their philosophy. It's, I get to do whatever I want to whoever I want, and I get to control them, and I get to take away their rights, and that is my right to do that. And if you disagree with that, you're wrong. And the protesting example is such a great example, because you're right. This is also something that happened on on Inauguration Day. Yeah. There were a bunch of protests, and there were like a few people who were violent, but they arrested like hundreds of people and charged them with these, whatever it was, like felony rioting or something. And so many people were facing like 60 years in prison as a result of this. And,
right. And it's still happening, right? I believe.
Yep. There's a case going on right now. Mm-hmm.
Do you guys remember, I think her name, was it Red Fawn?
Red Fawn.
Yeah. Who, am I remembering it correctly? Is she facing life in prison? I believe she is. Is that correct for the...
I don't know if it's life in prison. It's certainly more than 20. Like it's insane.
Right. Yeah. But it's a really insane sentence. Like for the no dapple thing, she was kind of like leading the protests, and it is just I couldn't. I mean, even for our country, I couldn't believe it when I read that the kind of sentence she was up against for protesting this kind of thing.
Yeah, and there's been a bunch of these laws that effectively criminalize protesting that are being passed in Republican legislatures around the country. So again, this goes right back to the main issue here. You would expect the people who love to pretend like they're the most in favor of free speech and the First Amendment, that they would be the first ones to go nuts whenever there's an example of a law passed at the state level that tries to criminalize protesting. But no, those are the people who are actually passing the laws. They have nothing to say about actual threats to the First Amendment.
Yeah, and attorney generals from conservative states, they actually penned a letter to Jeff Sessions' office, the U.S. Attorney General, asking him to be able to prosecute any protesters against oil pipelines like DAPL or Keystone XL as terrorists. And Jeff Sessions basically said, yeah, we will be, prosecuting them to the full extent of the law. Basically, he didn't necessarily use the word terrorist, from, if I'm remembering this correctly, but he did basically say, yeah, we're going to be pretty arbitrary and not allow them to protest these pipelines. So if they cause any damage whatsoever, then yes, you can prosecute them as a terrorist, which is just insane to me.
When are we going to start prosecuting oil companies as terrorists?
Never.
Right?
Yeah.
Look at the anti-BDS laws too that are being passed now in
right.
legislatures.
A perfect example.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that again, the free speech warriors would say, "What? This is nuts. Are you kidding me?" So basically, I think the way it works is any business that has like some sort of state government contract, what they're saying is you will not get a contract if you in any way like publicly support boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. Well, again, that's effectively, taking away somebody's free speech rights. If you're saying, I'm going to hold your economic livelihood over your head, and it's the state that's holding your livelihood over your head. So they're saying it's a form of censorship is what it is. And again, no fucking word from the people on the right. And again, Dave Rubin, who loves to pretend.
This was like a bipartisan thing.
Yep.
Yeah, that is a bipartisan
thing. With the anti-BDS movements and legislation being passed to outlaw any type of and I believe it was Kristen Gillibrand supported it, and then a bunch of people were writing to her to not support it, and then she said she would review it. But it's like Ashley said, it's very much a bipartisan issue, because when it comes to support for Israel, unconditional support for Israel, America is not a good friend. And I say that because I think a good friend, when a person has run amok, right? If I'm an alcoholic, and if I don't have my life together, and I'm just constantly, going out and doing everything that's not good for me, and then I have a friend that enables all my worst behavior, I don't think that's a good friend.
Yeah,
and
that's a good
is
point.
what I see the relationship between Israel and America being, because when you're just consistently violating international law on a daily basis, international law, not just that, Muslim countries are adamantly against, but that the Western world, with the exception of the US, has said it's illegal, and particularly having to do with settlements that are a direct obstruction to peace. So when you have America enabling this kind of behavior and still giving Israel billions of taxpayer dollars, they still receive the most amount of money out of any country that the US gives foreign aid to, and yet any type of dissent or criticism of Israel is immediately labeled anti-Semitic, or is even criminalized.
Yeah.
That's a problem. It's an extension of America, right? I spent some time in Israel and the West Bank, and they call it the United States of Israel. So they call it US.
And meanwhile, we give them billions. They have universal health care and we don't.
Right.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing too, I don't know if you guys remember, it's on the same line, but so recently in Houston, people that were, and I don't remember what they were applying to, but they were applying
yes,
for
I know
aid for the hurricane relief, and they were made to sign this contract that basically said, in order for us to basically help you rebuild your life, you can't protest Israel. Like
literally. To apply for disaster relief, you need to sign a pledge saying you will not boycott Israel. Like, are you kidding me?
It's fucked up.
Yeah.
Even on the most liberal college campuses in the country, they are basically putting in policies or forming groups that aren't being spearheaded, or formed by students that are basically anti-BDS. My college campus, very liberal campus in Portland, Oregon, they have a Facebook group that they're promoting. I saw it pop up on my Facebook ads, basically saying, students against the boycott, and all of the comments are like, what? Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. We're for Palestinian human rights. We support Israeli human rights, of course, but they're the ones who are the aggressors. They're the ones who are illegally occupying Palestine. So why would you think that a really hyper-liberal school and their student body would ever support something like that? So it's like they're trying to push this policy and this idea that BDS is bad onto everyone, when this newer generation, people our age, don't buy it. We're just against it.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting how when you look at actual policy that's against free speech and free protest, probably the biggest wave right now is that they're trying to criminalize support for BDS. And again, the free speech warriors have absolutely nothing to say about it. In fact, it's not a wild assumption that many of them support this. You know,
Right.
According to Ben Shapiro, what Arabs like to live in sewage.
Oh yeah,
right,
Ben Shapiro,
which is literally
intellectual.
because they don't have electricity.
Genius Ben Shapiro.
Exactly. What a brilliant intellectual.
The intellectual on the right.
The right. Oh,
hashtag settlements rock. I'm so intelligent, please.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But this is literally stemming from the fact that in Gaza, Palestinians, and I spent some time in Gaza as well, and it's the only beach that I have ever been to. It does not smell like a beach. It doesn't smell like anything. You're by the sea, and it's usually you have salt water, and you have that fresh smell of the sea, and it doesn't smell like that. And the reason why is because the sewage system in Gaza does not work properly, because for over half of the day they don't have electrical power. And everything in Gaza is controlled by Israel. They withdraw taxes, and the other borders with Egypt, and Egypt is now working with Israel. So it's the world's largest open air prison. Yeah. So because of this, a lot of the sewage actually gets pumped into the sea. So one of the people that I met there, he said he used to swim in the sea every day, and he stopped because he was getting rashes all over his body, and it's because of the amount of sewage. And so Ben Shapiro takes this, and he says Arabs love sewage.
Yeah. Oh, they live in sewage.
They live in sewage. Yeah.
It's like,
because they're such disgusting monsters.
Yeah, thank you for exposing your bigotry as you think you're being intellectual. That's what these guys do, man. They take away all the context of it, and then just it's like what right wingers do with the statistics on black people. Like the statistics show black families live in poverty more so than white families. But then they look at that as some sort of a verification of their ideology that black people are inferior. It's like, well, they're more poor, see? So we're right. It's like, wait, what? No, do you not understand? You're actually making the liberal case when you say something like that obviously there's a whole bunch of context that goes into that. And there's decades and decades of oppression. There's slavery, and then there's Jim Crow.
Oh, get over the past, Kyle. Come on. That already happened. Why are you still crying about it? Look at, Asian people, they've been oppressed too, and now they're super successful.
What's so funny is that is like that's a point that they'll make all the time about, Asians do well. But what's funny is they don't fully understand that either, because when you look at Asian immigrants who come to this country who are from poorer nations, so like Vietnamese immigrants, for example, they actually don't do well financially. The Asians who tend to do well financially in the U.S. Come here with a lot of money from other wealthier, they're like the top 1% of other Asian countries. So like there could be people who are high income that are Chinese that come here, or Japanese that come here, and they tend to do well because they already came here with a lot of financial well-being, and their families are already pretty well off. Whereas again, when it's somebody from Vietnam, they're typically not as well off, so they don't do as well financially. So again, it's one of those things where they love to cite that as if it like destroys arguments on the left, but they're citing something they don't even understand. That it actually goes to prove our point that if you're coming from poverty and you don't have much material well-being, it's much harder to climb that ladder to get the money. But if you're coming from money, it's much easier to continue to make money. So it's funny that they don't get that either. Well,
it's because they cling to the myth of the American dream. To be honest, like there are very, very, very few cases where real rags to riches cases, and the other thing too, there actually is some like research on this too. They don't really see themselves like on the socioeconomic ladder. They don't really see themselves where they actually are. They actually see themselves usually as better off than what they are. So they don't quite realize, first of all, how much the 1%, is fucking them, just like they are the poorest of everyone. Yep. And so basically what happens is they look down on people who are poorer than them, and they go, well, I'm fine as long as I'm not there. We're good.
That's why Trump is so brilliant, right? It's divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But it's like, oh, that rich man isn't fucking you. It's the Muslims, it's the Mexicans, it's anybody who's different than me, and they're taking your jobs, and they're rapists, and it's never corporations, it's never politicians that pass legislation that overwhelmingly benefit their donors. It's never people that have rigged the rules to benefit a very specific set of people. Of course, it's the the quote unquote the plebs, right?
Yeah.
So you can always, as long as we keep fighting each other, then exactly, then the status quo.
Scapegoating 101. You're going to have to. I mean, this is why it was so successful, particularly with Trump, because Trump sold this picture to poor white people of, and again, they buy. You have to understand, they buy into the myth of Trump. So when they look at Trump, they don't see a guy who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth because his daddy was worth $400 million. They don't see a guy who went bankrupt 7 times and he's like a standard con man. They see a guy who, oh my goodness, he's a billionaire. He must have made it. He must be more intelligent. He must be harder working. He must be more moral than everybody around him because he's at the top of this game that we're playing. He's at the top of the pyramid here. So he holds himself up as this like beacon. And then again, Trump speaks to these poor white people and says, well, listen, you too could be just like me if it wasn't for the fucking Muslims doing all those terror attacks and coming in the country, if it wasn't for all the illegal aliens that come in the country and, commit crime. And so, in other words, it's scapegoating. Blame people who are poorer than you and have no power for, again, like you were so adequately describing there, a system that has rigged rules that just benefit the top. And what's so disgusting about it is how, at this point, it's so shameless because look at even their tax plan. I mean, if you make $75,000 a year or less, they're raising your taxes. So, I mean, that's incredible. Their main argument they make from an economic perspective to get elected is we're going to cut your taxes. We're going to cut your taxes. So they tell poor people, they tell middle-class people, we're going to cut your taxes.
Wait, but Kyle, hold on a second. I just want to clarify because I went to a number of Trump rallies, right? And I was covering Trump before he won. And this is the funny thing because I spoke to a Trump supporter about this. When I was at a Trump rally, what they were chanting was not cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes. It was build a wall, build a wall, build a wall. So Trump's campaign wasn't fundamentally based on like, yeah, I'm a traditional Republican and I'm going to cut your taxes. Sure, he did mention it, but what really catapulted him to the top is, this divide and conquer strategy that we're talking about.
Yeah. So let me be clear about it. In my mind, I think it's both things. So Trump's campaign was really heavy on the bigotry, but it was also heavy on a kind of pseudo-economic populism that you wouldn't see from other establishment Republicans.
Yeah. Right.
So I think you're right in that Trump, in some ways, is like the quintessential establishment Republican because he took all the coded bigotry of the Mitt Romneys and the Jeb Bushes, and he said, no, I'm going to drop the coding. I'm not going to tiptoe around it anymore. I'm just going to say it. I'm going to say the Mexicans, they're criminals, they're rapists. I assume some are good people. We got to do stop and frisk. We got to do it nationwide. We got to build the wall, folks. The criminal aliens are coming in. We got to build the wall. So you're right. And that's a big part of it is that he dropped the coded language, was kind of upfront about it with his bigotry. But then the other part of it was, apart from telling, poor white people, oh, I'm going to cut your taxes, I'm going to cut your taxes. It was also, he was smart in that he campaigned in the Rust Belt nonstop towards the end of the election. And when he was in the Rust Belt, he kept hammering shitty free trade deals. He kept hammering TPP and NAFTA. And Hillary Clinton, in all her smugness, didn't understand that it was her husband that signed NAFTA. It was her who supported many of these outsourcing deals. And not only did she not step foot in many of these Rust Belt states, if she was against trade, she was just tepidly against it because she was for it. But Bernie pushed her to tepidly be against it, but she never even spoke about it.
Nobody believed her, too.
You had the perfect storm with Trump because you had the outward xenophobia and bigotry that, the Republican base loves, and then he mixed that in with the economic populism that everybody loves. And then that's the perfect storm that led to him winning.
For sure. Just want to say really quick, welcome Kevin to the chat. He's running a little bit late. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Hey,
yes,
Kevin.
We can hear you.
Awesome. Hey, guys, how you doing? Hi, hey, Kyle, what's up?
Nothing much, man. Good to talk to you.
You too.
So we, in the spirit of the holidays today, Kevin, we're talking about snowflakes. right-wing snowflakes in particular. Now, we've kind of gone from everything from, you know, the social injustice warriors to the Israel anti-BDS, people who are supposedly in favor of free speech, not speaking out against that. Another thing I want to talk about is that I think really goes well with this topic is the gay baker situation.
Oh.
To where, you know, you see a lot of free speech people saying that, well, these bakers, if they don't want to bake cakes for gay weddings, then that's their own, you know, freedom of speech and whatnot. And to me, how is that not a form of them being social justice warriors? Because if you're triggered by gay people to the point where you can't even bake them a cake, if you own a bakery, how are you not a snowflake? And one thing that I saw to cite, you know, a hypothetical show, the Rubin Report, he was on Fox News, and as a gay person argued that bakers should be able to discriminate against him and his husband. And I saw that, and then I played that clip for my husband, and then we were both like, what the fuck are you doing? Obviously you don't believe this, because that's really inconvenient. If somebody didn't want to bake, not like I don't get cakes baked for me, but like if I really wanted to get a cake and somebody said I can't bake a cake for you because you're a homo, I tell them to go fuck off and call them a snowflake. You don't want to support
them anyway, right?
Exactly. So it's just this whole, in order to pander to right-wingers, you have to pretend to be against yourself and that you would support discrimination against yourself, which doesn't make sense to me. How are they not getting lambasted for that? These supposedly Christian cake owners or cake bakers, whatever the fuck, who are triggered by gay people. I mean, how is that not something that they make fun of themselves, being advocates of free speech? How is it the other way, that the baker is the one who's in favor of free speech? I don't get it.
That's a good point. I actually never thought about this issue in those terms, but I think you're right. I think that if you are so offended by just the existence of gay people that like, no, I will not engage in regular financial transactions with you. Like, yeah, you're the one that's being a drama queen. You're the one that's triggered. You're the one that needs a safe space. You're the snowflake. I never thought about it like that, but that's true. That's what's going on there. It's something that they have this deep ideological position, probably based on some fundamentalist interpretation of their religion, where they're like, oh, I cannot be around such people. It's like, yeah, well, then that's a form of Puritanism and snowflakeism that's really, really strident. But, you know, it's really sad to see somebody like Rubin start, you know, arguing for legalized discrimination, because, you know, these are debates that at least all reasonable people thought were kind of settled with the Civil Rights Act.
Yeah.
Like the whole idea was, the whole, you know, spirit of that was, oh, you can't discriminate against people based on arbitrary things. Like you can't say, hey, you have more melanin in your skin, so we're not going to serve you. Like that should be illegal. That's so fucking arbitrary and wrong. That's like saying, oh, you know, hey, you have blue eyes, I'm not going to serve. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah. And, you know, you could easily imagine kind of a worst case scenario to paint the immorality of a situation like that. Imagine, for example, you have a black family driving in rural Mississippi and their car breaks down on a 100-degree day. And they walk 6 miles to the nearest gas station. They're drenched in sweat. They have their kids with them. And it's just a horrible situation. And they go, okay, I need to buy some gas from you for my car, which broke down on the road. I ran out of gas. And the person goes, no, I'm not going to serve you. You're an N-word.
Yeah.
Like, how can any reasonable person look at that and not immediately go, yeah, I think we need some sort of law against this, you know? And it's not like we're saying, hey, under no circumstance can you not serve somebody. If somebody comes into your store and they're fucking tipping over shelves and they're being an asshole, all of us agree, yeah, you don't have to serve that guy. That guy's being a douche. Kick that guy out. But if you're discriminating based on arbitrary characteristics like, you know, their sexual orientation, their gender, their religion, like, no, fuck you, that should be illegal. And of course you should make those people engage in regular financial transactions with other regular people who they despise.
See, I agree with all of you, but I read this article recently and I just pulled it up on Salon, and it's called Why Evangelicals Are Okay with Voting for Roy Moore. So it gave me this perspective that kind of made me understand their views of the world in a way. And for me, it's batshit crazy. But the way that they talk about homosexuality, what you're saying is, you're not respecting someone's choices and blah, blah, blah. But this is how they say it. I'm just going to read this paragraph. It says, for many American Christians, the Bible provides a very clear and commanding code of purity that informs their views on such issues as adultery, premarital sex, homosexuality, condoms in schools. They fervently believe that humans are sinful and have the demonic capacity to defy the divine plan for America and drive God out of the United States and out of our world. For these believers, the sin of abandoning the sacred is not limited to the sinners alone. Once the evil they perceive is endorsed by their government, whether same-sex marriage or abortion, not only the evildoers will be punished. America's sins, it is believed, will also bring faithful Christians down with them. By allowing sin to flourish, Christians themselves will have contributed to the contamination of God's sanctuary. In short, what we're talking about with these, whether they serve the cake or not for a same-sex couple, in short, they see salvation at stake.
Wow. I didn't know that. As someone who grew up religious, my family, I mean, they were
These
very
are evangelicals. These are evangelicals. So this is on a bit of the extreme end.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my family never got political with it, so I don't think that they necessarily, would be classified as evangelical. But yeah, when we grew up as Christian, definitely they were vehemently anti-gay and anti-abortion and whatnot, and didn't want those policies, to be codified into law. But yeah, it's interesting to see that when we make the case that, it doesn't matter what two consenting adults do or what, if an interracial doesn't affect you personally, that actually brings it into perspective, because they do feel like it has an impact on their life.
Completely. This is literally the future of humanity and the apocalypse.
Wow.
So I feel like I would be more sympathetic to that argument if they actually were consistent in that they read the Bible and they believed it. Because, for example, if you're a Bible literalist, you would have to be in favor of abortion, because abortion is in the Bible.
Yep.
So there's a portion of the Bible where they talk about how if your wife cheats on you, she needs to drink bitter water, they call it. And the bitter water induces an abortion, induces like a miscarriage. And they say if she drinks the bitter water and then she aborts, well, that's okay, because that was the kid of the person she cheated on you with. But if she drinks it and she doesn't, well, that's okay, because then that's your baby. So it's like, that's the Bible saying if your wife cheats on you, get an abortion. So,
but women who get raped can't have an abortion.
Correct.
So,
and again, like in the Bible, you want to talk about biblical morality. I mean, what is it? The story of Lot, where the daughters rape their father. Like that's in, like, there are all these things in the Bible.
Get them drunk. They get them drunk and rape their
Exactly. So like these people, they say, oh, no. All we care about is God. And we're just trying to follow God's word and follow the Bible. But it's like, no, you're actually not doing that. And if you were doing that, number one, it's actually impossible, because there's so much contradictory shit in there. You'd have to hold opposite opinions on those things. But even in areas where it's not contradictory, they're not on the side of the Bible. So like with immigration, for example, I once did a segment where I covered, there's like over a dozen different parts of the Bible, and they're really clear on the issue of immigration, where they're like, always treat immigrants nicely, treat them like they're your family. That's consistent throughout the Bible. And not a single one of these Christians, these evangelicals, are saying that. They're all like, no, fuck immigrants. And it's virtually across the board. And like with war, for example, well, war might not be a good example, because there's plenty of war in the Bible that they could say, oh, this is our thing. But like Jesus, in most of his moods in the New Testament, is all like hippy dippy, I'm a communist before communism existed
Jesus
type
Christ
shit.
is a socialist revolutionary.
Yeah.
I always,
exactly.
A friend of mine always said, he said, and I totally agree with him, and I was speaking with somebody else about this, that they said, I love Jesus, but I'm terrified of his followers. And that's pretty much where I'm at.
One of my favorite quotes of myself, and I'm aware that sounds incredibly douchey. Is,
how modest of you, Kyle.
Jesus Christ makes Noam Chomsky look like Ann Coulter. Yeah. That's how far left he is.
Yeah.
That is a really great quote,
actually. That's really good.
I actually had a conversation with my friends about this today in text. It was really funny that you brought this up, because as some of you know, I'm helping a candidate here run, and so we were kind of talking about maybe how to, channel Jesus. That sounds really weird, but kind of like channel the Bible and channel like the things that Jesus did when we talk, to try to get people on the right to adopt progressive values, or at least be more accepting of them. And I had this conversation because I wasn't actually raised with religion at all, so I don't know that much about it. So most of my friends are, so I actually asked them about it, and I have this one friend who is he's a nice guy, but he's a libertarian, or he thinks he's a libertarian. I'm not really sure.
We're not selfish enough, basically. That's what he believes.
Yeah, it's kind of just like, well, but Jesus encouraged people to give to the poor. He didn't make them give to the poor like you would with taxation, which makes you, like.
Have you seen conservative Jesus? Have you guys seen Tory Jesus and conservative Jesus? There's a Tory Jesus account on Twitter, and there's a conservative Jesus account, and it is the funniest thing in the world. It's like, a leper comes to Jesus like, oh, Jesus, please help me. And then Jesus says, I'm sorry, we don't cover pre-existing conditions. Yeah, you're going to have to walk the other way. And then another one, it's like a bunch of immigrant kids that come, and it's like, Jesus, please give us refuge. And then he says, I'm sorry, you're going to grow up to be terrorists. You're going to grow up to be terrorists, so I just can't house you.
That's pretty good.
Really good.
It's interesting because I don't know how much, like, I understand what you're saying, use their ideology to get them actually on your side. Like, say, hey, you believe in Jesus. Jesus said this, this, and this, so aren't you going to come on my side? But
that doesn't work.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I don't know how much that works because, like, for example, in talking about this tax bill that the Republicans are pushing now, there's two, like, just gigantic atomic bomb level facts about this bill that are just seemingly totally overlooked by people, which is, number one, it adds anywhere from $1 trillion to $1.4 trillion to the deficit. And this is the party that says they care the most about, like, not increasing the deficit. And then number two is the fact I already mentioned, which is it raises taxes on everybody that makes $75,000 a year or less, which is, like, again, the main fucking thing that they say they care about. Oh, we got to give tax cuts to the middle class. So you would think that if you can use their own ideology against them, that they'd come around to it. But, I mean, apparently not. Definitely not with the elected people. But, then again, maybe I'm wrong because the polls do show that even many Republicans, or like average Joe Republicans, are kind of against this bill. It's very unpopular, just like his healthcare bill was.
So I think also it depends on who this, I guess, strategy, if you want to call it that, is coming from. So the person I'm referring to is going to be running as an independent for a number of reasons. Just like I said, I mentioned in a previous podcast, just that, there's a lot of tribalism in general. So, and he kind of wants to, abolish the two-party system. So he's running as an independent. So he's trying not to use too much party rhetoric, I guess you could say, from either side. But we're also in the Deep South. So even the Democrats, like everybody, most people are Christian, even like Democrats. So that's Jesus and football are kind of the unifying things down here, if I'm being perfectly honest. And so we don't know how well it's going to work yet, but he's going to kind of try this whole WWJD thing, like, okay, well, do you think Jesus would do this if we did, what would Jesus would think that this is a good thing to do because, XYZ. So we're going to try it out. I don't know how
to let us know how that goes.
Yeah, I don't know how you can generalize things because we are in Alabama, but we're going to try it.
But I mean, actually, according to research, what you guys are talking about is actually the most effective way to convince someone to be open to your position, right? So if I'm a liberal, I'm not going to be talking to a conservative based on an argument of fairness, for example. We have to give everybody... it's not fair that somebody's on the streets and we should give them housing. No, what do conservatives care about? They care about opportunity, right? And they care that everybody, I don't know, what the fuck do they care about? Now I'm thinking.
Nothing.
Sorry.
About nothing.
but you have to frame things in the lens that appeals to somebody's values. So libertarians care about liberty, right? So if I'm going to talk
Right.
about if I'm going to talk about free speech, then I'm going to talk about the liberty of God. But you know what I mean. So the lens that you're talking about does make sense. But like we said, it doesn't work with elected officials because elected officials aren't responsive to people and they don't give a fuck. And they're delivering to their donors. But when we are talking about speaking with individual people on the streets or people that may think differently than us, we do have to look at the frame that we're portraying when it comes to individual issues, and that would be ideal. But whether it's effective or not, you have to try it out.
Yeah,
Right.
I have a theory on elections, which is that there's basically one thing that cuts across almost all party lines and ideological lines. And the people who are excluded from this are libertarians, who you briefly touched on there. But among average Joe Republicans and Democrats, economic populism works with them. I think that's the one thing that really has appeal.
It does.
That goes way. And what's funny is that's the one thing that Democrats, establishment Democrats, refuse to embrace, because that's the one thing that would piss off their donors.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't see, Democrats running all over the place talking about Medicare for all. I mean, obviously Justice Democrats do, but that's a different, wing of the Democratic Party. Your run-of-the-mill Democrats are not gonna, go all in on rhetoric talking about Medicare for all and free college and a living wage and unionization and and it's sad because that's how they would win, like, across the board.
Exactly. But I think, and I'm going to go back to Jeremy Corbyn with this one, right? Because I think what's beautiful that Jeremy Corbyn does and nobody is doing in the US, only Bernie Sanders does this as well. But what Jeremy Corbyn did so beautifully is that he not only articulated who he was for and who he was representing, but he also articulated who he did not represent.
Yeah, for the many, not the few.
For the many, not the few.
Yep.
So if I'm going to talk about the people, if I'm going to talk about affordable drugs, I am not representing pharmaceutical companies. And as I'm looking at you, Cory Booker.
Yeah.
And if I'm talking about any given issue, if I'm talking about regulating Wall Street, I'm not talking about the needs of Wall Street. I'm saying I am not here to represent Wall Street because the needs of what makes Wall Street successful are directly inimical to what benefits the American people.
But we're a big tent party, yay! We have such a big tent that we allow in the opposing party, yay!
One doesn't exclude
No,
the
but
other.
they don't. Like they're pretty. At least some of the ones I've talked to here, they're not shy about saying, "We're Big Tent," except for Republicans. And it's not even that they're really shy about it; they just say it. So
What did
I
Doug
don't
Jones just say? He just said, "I'm middle of the ground" or whatever.
Yeah, he said, "I won because I'm center of the road."
Center of the.
It's like, no,
You won because you're not a
boink little
pedophile.
kids.
That
Yeah,
guy-
exactly.
I'm telling you, that guy is going to be the next rendition of Joe Manchin. Guaranteed.
Oh, 100%. There's no doubt about it. And the sad thing is, I mean, the other choice was Satan.
Right.
It's Satan or Joe Manchin.
Yeah. And I already heard calls for people, like, there was on NBR the other day, there was a reporter out of Birmingham who literally said Doug Jones is going to have to make a sharp pivot right if he wants to stay in office. And I'm like, God damn it, stop saying, he was literally just elected. Like, what the,
Yeah,
You'll know what I'm saying.
you just touched on a giant problem in the U.S., which is the Overton window in Washington, D.C., and what's considered respectable and what's considered not respectable. So, Bernie to these people is way outside the Overton window, and oh my God, he's so crazy and far left. Meanwhile, if you go issue for issue, the American people overwhelmingly agree with him on almost every single one of his beliefs. Whereas, they say the center is something like Joe Manchin. Meanwhile, Joe Manchin he just supported the deregulation of Wall Street further. Like, that's not a centrist position. That's a corporatist position. So the problem is that we have, the far right in the U.S. represents this weird sort of pseudo-fascism, this kind of overt corporatism mixed in with Christian fundamentalism. And it's just like not representing anybody except the mega rich and the craziest people in the country.
And if you,
and then
you
the
notice,
left is weak and has no teeth, and the best you get is like Bernie.
And if you notice, though, it's the same. It's the same thing in the media. I mean, Kyle knows this. He covers this shit. It's always the media is always this centered milquetoast. We don't want to be nice to Bernie. I mean, they bring him on, but I mean, let's say he becomes on CNN, he goes on MSNBC with Chris Hayes and stuff. But I mean, they just treat him like this, like little like nobody, like, we don't want to deal with you.
Well,
but
they
we gotta
bring him
you.
on now because he's good for ratings. And by the way, Kevin, I forgot to tell you how much I love your Tupac poster.
Oh, thank you. But
it just looks at me every time.
But I think that's a huge problem, also within the media and also within obviously the regular political spectrum, where debate goes on between different politicians, and obviously, like Kyle said, they treat Bernie as if he's like this left-wing radical, like he is Jeremy Corbyn. And like while I have the same level of respect for both of them, Corbyn is obviously much more to the left, and rightfully so. And I mean, he would be run out of town in this country.
The Overton window, though, in Britain isn't as far to the right as it is.
Right. Exactly. And you're right. The thing that bothers me most about the media is how shitty they are at going after Trump. I mean, here you have a guy who is really just destroying the country and taking every negative policy that was put in place by Bush or Obama and just pumping it full of steroids and going, yoo-hoo, here we go, let's fuck everything up. And like, they're just so utterly toothless in their criticisms of him. You get more outrage. So like the Kirsten Gillibrand tweet the other day, it totally tasteless. And yes, he was implying like a sexual angle to it, but they had such a meltdown over it that by the end of it, I was like, oh, I want to like defend Trump because they're so shitty as to how they're attacking him. Because they spend more time on stuff like that than they do about the fact that Trump's first military action as president killed an 8-year-old girl, American girl, nonetheless. Like, there was almost no coverage of that at all. Meanwhile, that should be, how much the media focused on fucking Benghazi and how much they focus now on the Russia scandal. Like, you should still be talking about that 8-year-old American girl who was killed.
So what is it? Why do they cover the Benghazi stuff like ridiculously crazy? And that involves people getting killed overseas, Americans, so on and so forth. But then when they cover, when they cover Yemeni children, Yemeni innocent people in other countries, they don't cover that as much, I guess, because the right wing isn't like railing against it. I don't know what it is.
I think there's multiple answers to that question. You have like the perfect storm of shittiness that leads to like a media that's totally ineffectual. And I think one of those things is a sensationalism bias. So like they feel like they can get more ratings if they just go nuts over, Donald Trump feuding with Don Lemon or Donald Trump tweeting about Kirsten Gillibrand. Like they think, oh my God, bombshell, we can talk about this. And that's the sensationalism bias angle of it. Yeah. But the other part of it is the establishment bias of the media, which is these people are the establishment. They are the elites. They're all very wealthy. They all run in the same social circle. So they're more likely to focus on stuff like that than they are to focus on the situation in Yemen, because there's blood on both parties' hands for that. I mean, Yemen, we're talking about the absolute destruction of a country to the point where it's genocide now. I mean, Saudi Arabia is blockading it, not letting in food, not letting in medical supplies, which are absolutely necessary. They're bombing the shit out of everything in sight. America's supplying the weapons, including illegal cluster bombs under international law. So we have blood on our hands for that, and the establishment is universally in favor of it. And what you get in the United States, and you see this in Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, he explains it better than I ever could, but you have a corporate structure that is subservient to state power in a way that honestly perhaps is even more subservient than state media is to state power in other countries. So you're never going to get the focus. I mean, could you imagine if they did like a big segment, they put on the screen, breaking news, and then they say half the country makes $30,000 a year or less, which by the way is like, that's the kind of treatment that a story like that should get. Like that's how you should be covering something. Like, this is unbelievable. We're in what's supposed to be the richest country ever, and half the country's poor. Like, what?
That would piss off all the corporate donors if you pointed out.
Exactly. And who the fuck is paying the bills for corporate media? The corporations. They cut to break. Who's paying them? The same people that they're about to rail against for making half the country poor, which is why they're never going to do it.
What would happen if we took the profit incentive out of the media?
There was a time where I think they did that, where they the news was considered a loss leader, where like everything else on TV would be, oh, we're doing this for profit, but the news, you'd lose money, but that was expected. If you do that, I think you get a lot more outlets that are good, like not NPR, PBS sometimes does some good stuff with like Frontline. They do some good.
Frontline's fantastic.
I love Frontline.
Yeah, and it would be great if all of our media was like that. And I just also want to be clear about something else. When I rail against the mainstream media and corporate media, I'm really focused more on like, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and then the nightly news like ABC, CBS and stuff. I have a total exception for print outlets because I think print outlets actually do a fantastic job. Just that, unfortunately, they really don't get much traffic, or they don't get nearly as many eyeballs as they do on TV.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certain outlets that are print outlets that are just fucking awful.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them will push that establishment sensationalism bias. New York Times a lot of times will do that, but then New York Times sometimes will come out with these like incredible exposés, and it's like, wow, that's like a really interesting like piece, and you want to read it. And
I agree with you entirely, Kevin, but do you guys ever struggle because we are living in a time where the president of the United States is consistently attacking the media, right? And I believe that this is a problem. And at the same time, the media that he's attacking is corporate run. A lot of times it does promote what I would say is fake news, and it does not prioritize what it should. And in a way, when he talks about it being a witch hunt, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
So do you ever, so there's a lot of critique that I think all of us have for the corporate media, but there's also this environment where we have an authoritarian in power that is attacking media based not on the fact that it's corporatist, based on the fact that they are criticizing him, and based on the fact that they disagree with him. So how do you have that balance where you can still hold the media accountable while still recognizing that what he's doing is actually pretty dangerous?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think you have to stress both points, which is the first point is, okay, the media needs to be totally protected from an out-of-control government, and we should have an independent press, and it should never be subject to the whims of a petty dictator or authoritarian or tyrant. And yes, you're right. You accurately point out that like Trump, usually when he rails against the media, that's the crux of his argument is like, you're saying mean things about me and I don't like that. And I would shut that down if I could. Mm-hmm. Like when he threatened to like de-license news organizations that push what he calls fake news. And it's like, well, no, in a situation like that, you have to be 100% clear that like, no, that's not a fucking option. That's not on the table. You don't even have the power you think you do to quote de-license them. So we need to be clear about that we totally need a free and independent press, and the threats from the government are totally unacceptable. But then I also think you're right that we have to take everything on a case-by-case basis, and that we can say there is merited criticism even from otherwise horrible people against the media, where we can say, hey, media, you got to clean your fucking act up and get this story right. You know what I mean? And that is a hard line to walk, because you don't want to like hop on this right-wing bandwagon that loves to bash fake news, because they're doing it for quite nefarious purposes, and they're not doing it for intelligent purposes. But I do think, that we need to not do the opposite extreme, which is like pretend the media gets nothing wrong because a shitty president is attacking it. So you're right. It is a hard, it's like you're walking a high wire and trying to figure out how exactly to phrase things and how to word them and how to make your argument. But it does suck because you have the corporate media in the U.S., which is so universally horrible that they push for the war in Iraq, an illegal war that killed hundreds of thousands of innocent people. They called torture enhanced interrogation because the Bush administration wanted them to do that. But now when Trump attacks them, they clutch their pearls and say, oh, Mr. President, how dare you accuse us of not doing like good things? Sir, this is an apple. I want you to know that this is a fucking apple.
God.
So, the ironic thing with how the media covers Trump, the ironic thing about how the media covers Trump is that they don't go after him on the legitimate things, obviously. And he's actually lucky for that. He's lucky that they don't call him out for his fucking 30 times drone strikes that are killing 30 times more people or whatever it is. And he's, you know, bombing, 8 different countries now that we add Niger. So it's like, or Niger, whatever you call it. But like they don't cover like that stuff. They just can cover all the like, oh, you cursed really a lot or something in a speech, and you know, you said this really mean thing to Kirsten Gillibrand, or you called like that whole like thing with Don Lemon.
Exactly, they care more about what he says than about what he does.
Yeah, like that's
exactly. They're more bothered by what he says and the decorum.
It's the rhetoric,
politeness police. Yes, that's what it is.
That Don Lemon thing was.
He curses and he just doesn't have that. You know, he doesn't like look at the way he speaks. It's like a 4th grader, and this is why a lot of these blue collar, mostly white workers see themselves in him. The way that the media completely is condescending towards Trump, and the kind of critique that's leveled at him, not at policy, but at how he carries himself.
And when did he get the most praise? When he bombed Syria.
When he bombed fucking Syria. Because did you see the beautiful lights going out? And that was just, I have never seen a spectacle so beautiful.
But you know what?
Military-industrial complex and the American war machine.
We should stop complaining, though, because the complete and utter failure of the mainstream media has led people to watch people like us.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, we're just regular people just talking about stuff, there's something that we bring that you will never get from the fucking billion-dollar outlet that is CNN with all their, you know, fancy graphics and everybody wearing a suit and everybody with perfect fucking hair and makeup on. But there's an element of just fakeness and elite shittiness to it that, you know, makes it kind of a dying forum.
Yeah, and like with us being on, you know, being on our shows, we look perfectly regular, normal. We're not all putting on makeup and have special lighting or anything, just like Bernie Sanders is, you know, he's a regular looking guy. He's not all dressed up fancy, wearing an Armani suit. And, you know, his hair is all kind of messy, and, you know, he doesn't talk perfect, and he has, you know, whatever. So it's like,
we're filling a demand. We're filling a demand that was there. People want non-corporate media, and that's what we can provide. We're not, you know, news anchors that sit up, you know, with perfect posture. We don't talk, you know, like they talk, like they're robots. We're just normal people. We curse when we present the news. We, you know, provide you with emotion that we feel when we rightfully, you know, feel fucked over by these politicians. And that's why shows are thriving. Kyle's 100% right. But at the same time, that need for independent media has also opened the doors to lunatics like Alex Jones. So it's a double-edged sword.
Kyle,
it really
he's a favorite of yours, eh?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting, and I'm very happy about this, even though I've done a zillion segments on him and I've just utterly obliterated him repeatedly, I haven't, like, I've never come onto his radar and that he's felt the need to respond, because God forbid we get to that point, then, you know, you want to talk, I mean, that guy, he's more popular than I am. I mean, that's just undeniable. He has more listeners, more viewers than I do. So if he were to ever decide to turn that, you know, fury on me, he would win that battle in the sense that I would get a zillion death threats in a day, and, you know.
But you'd also get noticed, though. You'd be like, oh, who's this Kyle guy? Like, I mean, like.
That's true, but, you know, I don't know, and I'm not saying this to be a dick, but I don't know what percentage of his audience is savable. Yeah. Like, I'm sure there are many that are, because you guys would be surprised at the number of people who've reached out to me and said, oh, I'm a fan of you, and, you know, fill in the blank with whatever person.
I've seen that too, Kyle.
Yeah, so it's like, maybe a bunch of them are savable. I don't know, but I honestly would just rather not deal with the headache, and I'd rather keep taking shots at him and him ignoring me.
Yeah, I think the reason why you may have that crossover is because you and maybe a lot of the other people that, you know, like, I don't know, other right-wingers like Alex Jones, they aren't necessarily establishment. Granted, he sucks fucking Trump's dick all the time, but I mean, you know, they're not necessarily establishment in the
but you're right. But I do think that it's kind of sad when people can't distinguish between, you know, different forms of non-establishmentism. I mean, with Alex Jones, you know, and at this point, it's almost the case that he is in favor of the establishment, because all he does is suck Trump off on a daily basis.
Yeah, and Trump's the right. You always say Trump wants to be the part of the establishment. He wants to be the errand boy for Wall Street, and so does Alex Jones. Alex Jones wants to be in the establishment, but he just wants to have a reason to complain.
He is de facto establishment now since Trump, his guy got in, and Trump is with the establishment. Alex Jones is de facto establishment, I would argue.
And he's so unserious in that, you could watch his show for 3 years and still not really fully understand what he thinks on any policy issue. And that's like, what the fuck are you talking about politics for, you dipshit?
I swear that guy,
you're like a gossiping teenage girl or some shit talking about, and then Mika Brzezinski said this, and oh my God, let's talk about how fucking lizard people are not shooting up schools because that was a hoax, or, he's just
an SNL skit. He's such an SNL skit. It's crazy.
You guys have to Google Alex Jones fish people. If you're watching this video, or actually don't Google it, go to YouTube and type in Alex Jones fish people. There's literally a video that somebody put together of him with the music and everything, of him basically almost in tears talking about how he went to this secret government facility and he saw fish people. They were like batting at the glass saying, help. And he was serious. He was fucking serious.
Well, did you see him on Joe Rogan's podcast?
I did not.
Okay, so first of all, you got to watch that. It's like 4 hours long, but you need to force yourself to sit through it.
I will.
I love Joe Rogan, but
he lost it. Like, he was talking about, there was a point where he started arguing that like he was saying, you want to know the secret? And Joe's like, what? He's like, do you want to know the secret? Like, you really want me to let everything out here? And he's like, I guess. And he's like, oh, well, listen, interdimensional. Like, you start talking about other dimensions and fucking travel between other dimensions. And it's like, no, now you need to shut the fuck up because you've turned into the millennial version of Pat Robertson. Like, that's what you're doing. You're being like this metaphysical, paranormal, totally made up guy, but you're pandering more to a millennial audience. And so my takeaway, if you watch that, you'll see how he's lost it. But the like to dislike ratio on that video really like destroyed my hope for the future.
Really?
Because it was overwhelmingly liked, even though the guy's obviously crazy. And then the other point is, I think he was just massively coked up. Like, he just, even though he's fat, which is, it's hard to perceive of a fat cokehead, but he's like, I think he does coke like nonstop because that guy has more energy. Yeah. Maybe that's why he loves Trump, because Trump always says low energy jab. Alex is like, I'm high energy, daddy. I'm high energy. Because he is. He just doesn't shut the fuck up.
But to what degree are people watching that for entertainment and not for information?
Well, that's my hope. That's the hope I have.
Like, I've seen some of his stuff and I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, but he's serious. He's got to be serious. It's just...
No, but I'm saying like the like to dislike on that Joe Rogan video, like I'm hoping that half of those likes are people going, this is performance art and I'm going to like it because I like watching it even though he's so full of shit.
But then what is Joe Rogan? Is Joe Rogan sitting there and be like, does he accept this as real?
No,
or is he literally...
It's kind of classic Joe Rogan where like he'll let him get away with 80% of his bullshit, but then once he gets into that really shitty 20%, then Joe is like, hold on. You can't just say that. Like, I kind of remember that from that podcast. I feel like there were a few times where he was like,
"They're like
Alex, you can't say that. Like, that's not a thing you can say because you obviously don't know that that's true."
Yeah, those two are like best friends. And like, I remember I watched one because I watched a lot of Joe Rogan's podcasts too. And I remember there was one podcast where somebody was asking him about Alex Jones and saying like, what's up with this guy? And he's telling him, listen, I've known this guy, I don't know, since 1996 or something. So I've known him for 20 years. We're best friends from when we back when we did a skit. And he was wearing a George Bush mask. I was wearing a Richard Nixon mask or something. Mm-hmm. And the guy is just, he's harmless. He's just, I think he said, he's such a sweetheart. He's such a nice guy. I'm like, really? No. I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Maybe behind closed doors, he's another character. He's like something else.
That's actually not surprising to me that like maybe on a personal level, he's a nice guy. I mean, my father had met Trump and said, Trump, oh, he's a really nice guy. And it's like, yeah, but, you could be a nice person and then your policy ideas are just totally bought and paid for by Goldman Sachs. So that's possible.
Like, you guys know Geert Wilders? I don't know if I've talked about
Yes.
So I was at the RNC. I was covering the RNC for his media company whenever that was, July 2016. So Geert Wilders, along with a number of other right-wing leaders like Nigel Farage, were invited to come to the RNC. And I lived in the Netherlands before. My boyfriend is Dutch, so I'm very familiar with Dutch politics and all this stuff. So I was on the floor right before Trump was about to speak, and who do I see but this Geert Wilders, and he's this like 6'5" guy. They call him Mozart. He's got this, his hair is white, And he's known, if you guys aren't familiar with him, he's very far to the right in the Netherlands, very anti-Muslim.
Yep.
He was prosecuted for hate speech in the Netherlands for holding a rally and then yelling out, "Do we want more Moroccans or less Moroccans?" And then everybody was chanting almost like Nazi Germany, less Moroccans, less Moroccans. Anyway, it made headlines all over the world. So I see Geert Wilders, and I'm like, I need to interview him. So I go up to him and I tell him, I lived in Amsterdam, blah, blah, we chat. And I don't know if it was because I was just in this spiritual love and light mode, and this is what we're talking about with these people that espouse these awful ideas or that you see in a public space and they're so terrible and everything they're talking about is antithetical to what you believe. But Geert Wilders, on an interpersonal level, we fucking vibed, man. I'm sorry to say.
Really?
Like, we got along. And it scared me a little bit.
You got pushback from people who follow you, though, because I remember you made a post on Facebook.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
They hated me. Did I take that down? That was on my personal, because we're friends on Facebook. That wasn't on my public page. I wouldn't dare put that on my public page, even though I just announced that him and I
You're outed now.
Yeah, no, I totally did. But it was really shocking to me that people that, and I asked him questions and I challenged him and I told him that I disagreed with his views and what he thinks about the kind of rhetoric that he uses and what the repercussions of it against the people that are already marginalized and demonized to a certain extent. And but I was a little bit shocked at how it's what Hannah Arendt calls the banality of evil. Right?
Yeah.
But there are these people that are actually very nice and very kind, and you're talking to them and they seem harmless, and then you look at them in a public sphere and it's a little bit scary.
It's kind of like the same
thing
that
I have a theory. I have a
Go
theory about your story that you just told, which is we see this all the time with like anti-gay politicians who are like really, really, really anti-gay, but then they get caught blowing some dude in a New Jersey Turnpike bathroom. So like he is against minorities. That's really clear.
Yeah.
Even though he has a foreign wife, like Trump.
Does he really?
Yeah, he's
there you go. So
Yeah.
like maybe he turned his charm on for you because he's like, ooh, look at what we have here.
He's down with the brown. He's down with the brown.
Yeah.
With the brown.
But anyway.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, that actually gives me some. Okay, so I'm kind of split when you tell me that, he was nice. It gives me hope that we can still be polite to each other, even if we have beliefs that are just polar opposite. But at the same time, if you've ever watched interviews with like the creepiest people of all time, like serial killers, they are charismatic. They are able to make it seem as though they're not psychopaths, when in actuality, if you really dive into what they believe, they're absolutely insane. So on one hand, it's a good thing that that we can still get along with people who we disagree with like that, but it can be dangerous because we don't want to normalize them and, by proxy of them being normalized, their views being normalized as well, because I think that that's incredibly problematic. But, yeah,
I think the one thing that bothers me the most about the people that go out there and kind of act like, super nice, I guess, in their jobs, but then on the side they're kind of like, or I'm sorry, in their jobs they're like, at each other's throats, but they act super nice on the side is politicians. So a lot of people are like, my friend Bernie Sanders, and then the next day you're going at him, calling him a socialist and communist, and he believes this. Like him and Ted Cruz are a little weird. I don't know.
Well, when Ted Cruz does that, I kind of feel like he's being facetious, like he's being a disingenuous prick. Like my friend Bernie here, as he eats his tonsil stones. I don't believe that they're friends. I don't believe
and
that
that's one example. But I mean, like, there's just a lot of politicians out there who are just so buddy, and it's so weird. It's like with the media too. Like all these people in the media come out there and they're like, oh, hello, congressman. You're my good friend. Like that Steve Klubeck guy, the one that was on MSNBC. He the Stephanie Rule from MSNBC brings him on. She said, my friend Stephen Klubeck. So my friend, like,
well, of course, it's an incestuous circle.
Like,
they all hang out together. They go to the same restaurants. They go to the same events, and the media right now is not structured to challenge power.
No,
I think
it's not its job.
I think how nice some of these people could be actually in the long run is probably detrimental because it allows everybody to look at them as not being monsters. Like, Hillary Clinton's actually a great example of this. Like everybody in the establishment obviously loves Hillary Clinton. But when they look at people like us and we're like, listen, it's really, really, really hard for me to even consider voting for her because she voted for the Iraq War, which killed minimum 200,000 civilians.
Yeah.
And it's like, you talk to them and they think that's outrageous that you would like split on that. But, you know, that's because they're not looking at her as the sum total of her votes as a politician. They're looking at her as the nice old lady that they had coffee with, and she told them what Chelsea's up to, you know, in this next year. So
she's a likable grandmother.
Yeah, exactly. So, and by the way, I'm sure that even if I met her, assuming, of course, she doesn't know my work, but if I met her and she was nice to me, I'd be like, oh, that's weird that, like, you know, she's not like a monster. But, you know, that's the thing, is that I guess in a way, compartmentalization on stuff like this is a good thing, you know, because, you know, everybody could say, I hate to use such an extreme example, but like Hitler liked dogs. So, okay, he was good to dogs and not so much to Jews. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you guys see that New York Times profile on that?
What?
On Hitler from the 1930s?
No.
Oh, wow.
And it was
I have seen that.
Yes, and that's exactly what it was, Kyle.
Yeah.
It was basically Hitler likes dogs, and this is his routine.
Yeah.
He likes to go to breakfast.
They've shown
Yeah.
like I've seen old videos, like old video footage of him being really like nice to dogs and children, and then they're like, oh,
it shows you
killed all these Jews.
It shows you the power of propaganda that, like, you know, The Independent, the British paper, wrote about Osama bin Laden back when he was fighting the Soviets on our behalf, how he's a freedom fighter on the road to peace. And it's like, you know, that's the power of propaganda, that now, because, you know, they wrote this piece and defined him as that, that's how everybody views him. Oh, until he ends up orchestrating the biggest terror attack against the United States. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they put aside every single one of his fundamentalist beliefs and how extreme he is and how he believes in violence for his political ends. And they were just like, I don't know, he's helping us right now in our battle against the Soviet Union. So therefore, he is a freedom fighter on the road to peace.
Wasn't there recently an article that was put out by, I forget which publication it was, where they were humanizing like this white supremacist?
Richard
Yeah,
Spencer.
Was it Richard Spencer? No,
I think
it
it was
was
a
this other
Richard
guy.
Spencer.
No, that was a different one. There was a
No.
different one in the New York Times, I think you're talking about.
Yeah,
now.
it was super controversial.
Wasn't it
you
the
know-
one that was in the march at Charlottesville? Wasn't it like one of the kid?
Maybe.
I thought it was.
It was like the Nazi next door, basically.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about, the
Yeah.
Nazi next door. So what's
Yeah.
interesting is we should actually talk about that, because I thought that article was a lot more nuanced than many people on the left made it out to be. And I had mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, you don't want to, you know, the word that everybody uses now is normalize, like normalize this person and these beliefs and like allow them into acceptable society and just treat them as like another opinion, because they're super odious. So obviously we should call out the hatred for what it is. But then on the other hand, like, I feel like, you know, we've seen examples of left-wing writers writing these kinds of articles about jihadists and what would lead and
Thomas Friedman, MBS,
Ugh.
with the Prince of Saudi Arabia.
No, not that. I'm talking about, like, there was an example was in The Nation. There was a good article in The Nation in, I don't know, like a few years back, where they spoke about, like, they introduced you to somebody who lived in a town that was under U.S. siege, where they were getting bombed for years, and then, you know, the economy was totally obliterated, and you know, basically ISIS or some jihadist group swept in and said, listen, we're going to feed you, we're going to take care of you, here's a rifle, you're going to go on some missions for us. And basically they painted almost this sympathetic portrayal of this person who had no options but to like join ISIS or Al-Qaeda or something like that. And basically, so the point I'm getting at is, it's hard to make a distinction between like normalizing hideous beliefs or like explaining the process of radicalization and what could make an otherwise normal person do extreme things. And, you know, I do feel like there's a little bit of hypocrisy on both sides on this one, because what you'll find is, you know, right-wingers were outraged at that article on what led to somebody becoming a jihadist, because they said, oh, you're sympathizing with jihadists.
Yeah.
And then left-wingers were mad about the one with the Nazi, because they said, oh, you're sympathizing with a fucking Nazi. So I don't know what the right answer is and how these pieces should be written. I mean, obviously, we don't want to make it seem like this is just another opinion and, you know, you're doing propaganda for the most extreme views imaginable. But then I also don't want to fall into the trap of not sufficiently explaining what could lead to radicalization for a lot of people. So it's hard to like explain it without sounding sympathetic in either case. You know what I mean?
I think the radicalization of Muslims, of people from the Middle East is very different than the radicalization of white supremacists,
But
racist.
so sometimes, not always. Like,
yeah, not always.
So for example, there's a chance of like, there is like straight up ideological extremism that stems from religious fundamentalism. So like, you know, Saudi Arabia with their extreme Wahhabi ideology. And like they have these radical mosques that just preach hate 24/7 against everybody that's not exactly like them with their orthodox Sunni supremacy. And like, so you can have somebody who's never experienced like oppression, never experienced the US or some Western power bombing them, and they've just been taught hate from a young age. Yeah. And then lo and behold, they grow up and they're the next Osama bin Laden. Like that can happen too. And like, so in a situation like that, I guess the analysis is pretty easy because you go, yeah, fuck those people. They're just extremists. And in a situation similar to that would be like a guy like Richard Spencer. Like he never experienced any fucking oppression. No. He's been privileged his whole fucking life and he's an extremist. So it's easy to look at his example and say, yeah, fuck that guy. But you're right that there are examples. I think in both situations, like there are people who are Trump voters, you know, right, and who maybe joined like a white supremacist group like VDare, who, I don't know, maybe they, like everybody in their family lost their jobs when they were fucking shipped out, and there's some sort of economic concern underlying their extreme like white supremacy that grew out of that. And by the same token, you could have a jihadist who came out of a place that was bombed to smithereens and had like no options and felt like Al-Qaeda was the only group that can fight back for them against the evil, you know, West or some shit. So it's hard. It's difficult to have these conversations because you don't know, you know, which people are just purely ideological extremists and which ones had some sort of material issue that led to them becoming an extremist.
Yeah, I think that it's like the way that you described the walking a tightrope earlier, Kyle, was perfect. And on that issue of how to cover these types of things, specifically radicalization in a responsible manner, I saw one, I don't want to bungle it, but I think Reuters did a piece on a teenager who was radicalized and ended up joining ISIS and flew to Syria. And the way that they covered it was actually really tasteful and it was responsible because they took this position against radicalization, but they told her story through her father. So they basically humanized her in a way. Basically, the father said, she was just a normal teenager. She liked music. She liked to, read books and whatnot. And then he explained little by little how she was radicalized. She started wearing her hijab all of a sudden. She never wore it growing up. She started talking to people on Twitter that I didn't know. She started really, watching these Islamic philosophers online that are more extreme than what we taught her. And I think that the way he humanized it and explained how she gradually was radicalized was really important because clearly the whole piece, even though the people who are reporting this, which I believe it was Reuters, I could be wrong, they were seemingly objective, but the overall stance was that, the father was outraged that this happened, but at the same time, we did gain some insight as to how that radicalization gradually happened. So I do think there's a way to cover it, but it is difficult. It's really difficult.
And what would the reaction have been if that was the exact same story that you just explained, but it was some little young girl who ended up like becoming a Nazi and dating some fucking Nazi? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if the reaction would have been the same in both cases, but I don't know. I'd hope it would be. Like, I just wish we could, in all these cases, we just kind of put the politics aside and try to figure out, like, it's in my mind, it's kind of obvious to see when there's actual apologetics going on, because like you could see almost from the outlet, like if there's some far right outlet that's right, like if fucking Breitbart writes a piece that's like sympathetic about Nazis, you go, oh, that's because you literally have sympathies for like white supremacy. You know what I mean? But like, I mean, I guess if you're looking at an outlet like Reuters or the New York Times, for that instance, if they're doing a piece like that tries to explain the roots of extremism, whether it's ISIS or Nazism or whatever, that like they do it in a way that's not apologetic.
Hey guys, can I interrupt for just a second? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Unfortunately, I have to go, so I'm gonna go ahead and say goodbye. And I really want to stay and talk about this more, but I have to go. So
no problem.
All right. Well, bye guys.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
We'll
Bye.
probably be wrapping up soon anyway because we've gone on for about
Almost
an
2
hour
hours.
and a half. Yeah, almost 2 hours.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah.
insane.
So do you guys anything else you want to touch on beforehand? Otherwise, we can go ahead and wrap.
I just wanted to make one more argument or one more point regarding the conversation we were having about we were talking about kind of like the whole cake baking thing and Dave Rubin and all that stuff, like about how gay people like people like Dave Rubin kind of go after the gay people who want to be treated fairly.
Mhm.
I think there's a similar paradox that's used in the sense with a lot of the black conservatives out there who railed against black people. So, for example, if you look at Ben Carson, you look at who's that crazy Sheriff Joe Clark guy, or Sheriff
David Clark.
Dave Clark. Yeah, those people, they're always railing against like these thugs, these hood rats, and like these people are, it's almost like a sense of like they're making black people look bad kind of thing.
Yeah,
And-
it's profitable to be that turncoat, if you will.
Yeah. So in the sense of, I mean, obviously there isn't as much of that going on with the gay community, which is good, and it should not be happening with the black community either. But it just seems like they just want to throw people under the bus.
Well,
when
Dave is that in a sense. Dave is that with just liberalism. Like,
Yeah.
you know, he does this whole thing, the last liberal on earth. Like, he likes to portray himself like that.
Yeah.
And he does the, he did a video with Prager University, Why I Left the Left.
I know I
And
saw
it's
your
like-
I saw your debate with him on Israel Palestine, and he's ridiculously.
When he says the left is no longer liberal, that's his pinned tweet. But it's like, no, the correct thing is I'm no longer liberal. Just
Yeah,
the
you
way
did a
it's
video,
defined.
Why I Left the Left. So you're not,
Yeah.
you're saying I'm no
Right.
longer on the left. Like,
He's like a classic liberal or neoliberal. No, I'm not neoliberal, but I think he's like a classic
well,
liberal.
what's so funny about him, again, to get back to like our main thing, what this was all about, is he loves to talk about free speech and speak out against snowflakes and talk about classic liberalism. Yeah, well, go look at the list of the guests on his show and you tell me how many people he's had on that disagree with him philosophically. You could probably count them on one hand. Probably over 90% of the people who come on his show are right wingers.
Absolutely.
And you know that. Look, if that was the case,
That's fine. I mean, but it depends how you treat them.
Exactly. That's what I was gonna say. That is fine if he lets them all on, but then he's like, okay, well, let me like kind of where I disagree with people or where they say some shit that's not true. Let me like fucking push back. But he never
really
does that.
challenge them? Does he challenge anybody that
He-
like?
Exactly. He invites on
I don't
right
even know.
wingers and he plays patty cakes with them all day. And then he gets, incensed when somebody dares say like, hey, maybe you're actually not on the left at all in any way.
Exactly.
Like-
And that's the problem, I think. The main problem I have is him being disingenuous. We know that you're not liberal, but it's harmful because he's allowing the right to say, here's a liberal who's saying why liberals are wrong. And I think that if you're going to be conservative now, just be conservative and admit it, own it. But he doesn't, and that's what bugs me.
Maybe
Yeah.
he wants to like kiss the ass of both sides. I don't know what his shtick is.
What I'm annoyed by is how like even the mildest criticism of him, he's just like, nope, that's it. Like you're totally wrong and you're evil, and then he'll like block you or some shit. Like, so what happened with Ali Rizvi? I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's one of these ex-Muslim reformers, I guess he says. He's kind of like he calls himself the atheist Muslim. So like he says he's culturally Muslim, but he's really just a non-believer. And he was friends with Rubin, and he was on Rubin's show. And then I guess somebody had tweeted at Ali Rizvi a video of Rubin on Alex Jones' show where Rubin says something along the lines of, hey man, there's a place for you like in the media, atmosphere. And they ask Ali about that, and he's like, yeah, no, there's not a place for Alex Jones, and Dave's wrong about that. And I think Ali called it indefensible or something, and Dave like responded on Twitter and was like, the classic Dave Rubin, like, how dare you, sir? And he's like, what? Like, no, there's not a fucking place for Alex Jones because the establishment media sucks. Like, he says that Sandy Hook is a hoax, Like, okay, you could say he has a right to do his show, and none of us are arguing the government should come in and shut him down, but stop pretending like there is any legitimacy to this fucking lunatic. But that's what he does. Like, Rubin's thing is like, oh, tee-hee-hee, look, I have on Milo. I don't necessarily agree with him, but maybe I kind of agree with him, but I don't really agree with him. But here, let me let him spew his propaganda, and I'll just sit here.
Yeah.
Like, that's his thing. His whole thing is that.
Yeah, that's a perfect note to end on for a show titled Snowflakes. So unless anybody has anything else to say, if you want to check out more of the show, you can go to estabexiles.com. Kyle, if you want to tell us or tell our viewers where they can find more of your show and website and whatnot.
Sure, they can go to youtube.com/Secular Talk. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Kyle Kulinski on Twitter.
And Kyle's Twitter game is absolutely on point. So you will
I retweet you all the time.
Yeah. Me too.
I suck at Twitter, so I just retweet people.
Thank you. That makes me feel good. I like that. You're
basically my proxy. That's what I've done in my mind.
Everyone on Establishment Exiles, half their Twitter is themselves, the other half is Kyle Kulinski.
Yeah.
Very flattering. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, we will see you next year. This is our last episode of the year, so take care. Have a great holiday. We refuse to say Christmas because we are snowflakes and we are attacking Christmas. So happy New Year's as well. Take care.
Happy Festivus.
Happy holidays.